Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Have you ever actually looked at a simple orange prescription bottle and just wondered about the intense, honestly high-stakes legal framework sitting right behind it? Well, today we're exploring the guardrails of pharmacy. We're going to look at the complex, overlapping webs of federal law that are quite literally designed to keep you safe every single time you pick up a prescription.
Here's what we're looking at today. First, the birth of pharmacy drug law. Second, adulteration versus misbranding. Third, approvals, REMS, and tracking. Fourth, the Poison Prevention Packaging Act. And fifth, patient privacy.
Section 1. The birth of pharmacy drug law, from tragedy to regulation.
To truly understand these complex rules, we first have to recognize a pretty sobering truth. The bedrock of federal pharmacy law was, quite literally, written in blood. The safety we completely take for granted today, it came at a tremendous cost. This timeline brilliantly illustrates how tragedy basically forced the government's hand. Back in 1937, a product called elixir sulfanilamide was brought to market. It contained diethylene glycol, which, get this, is a toxic substance often used as antifreeze. It led to severe kidney failure and the deaths of over 100 people. This absolute disaster directly forced the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or FDCA, mandating that new drugs actually had to be proven safe before they could ever be marketed. Then, skipping ahead to the 1960s, we see the Cough-over-Harris Amendment. This was passed as a direct result of the thalidomide tragedy, where a drug given to pregnant women for morning sickness caused severe birth defects in thousands of babies worldwide. That tragedy forced the FDA to mandate that drugs be proven not just safe, but also effective for their claimed use.
Now, sandwiched right between those two tragic events was the 1951 Durham-Humphrey Amendment. This officially established the two classes of drugs we know today: prescription and over-the-counter. And here's a really interesting study tip drawn straight from our source. A drug's classification actually often depends entirely on its strength. For example, an ibuprofen tablet of 400 milligrams or more, that requires a prescription. But that 200 milligram ibuprofen you buy at the grocery store for a headache is totally over-the-counter. Same drug, completely different rules, based just on strength.
Moving on to Section 2, adulteration versus misbranding. The practical legalities.
So, let's move to how these historical laws translate into the day-to-day legalities a pharmacist actually has to navigate. If you're working in a pharmacy, you have to be obsessively aware of two critical violations of the FDCA. Those are adulteration and misbranding. The absolutely crucial point here is understanding the difference between the two. Adulteration refers to a problem with the physical drug itself. Think of it as a quality or purity issue. So, if it's contaminated, if its strength falls below the standard, or if it was just stored in an unsanitary condition, it's adulterated. Misbranding, on the other hand, means there is a problem with the outside, like how the drug is labeled or represented. If a label is false, misleading, or frankly just missing required information, that product is officially misbranded.
Now, you might be wondering how this actually applies in the real world of pharmacy practice. Look, mistakes happen, right? But in the extremely strict eyes of federal law, how are those mistakes categorized? For instance, what if a pharmacist misfills a prescription with the wrong directions?
Let's answer that by looking at some common pharmacy pitfalls. If a pharmacist counts medication on a tray that still has residue from another drug, the new drug is contaminated. Boom, that's adulteration. If they store medication in a refrigerator that isn't temperature controlled, the drug's integrity is compromised. Again, adulteration. If they dispense a medication without authorization or put the wrong directions on the label, the drug is misbranded. But here's where it gets really fascinating. If a pharmacist misfills a prescription with the wrong strength, it is actually a violation of both. It's adulterated because the physical strength differs from what it represents, and it's misbranded because the label is now completely false. Talk about a double whammy.
Section 3. Approvals, REMS, and tracking for modern safety.
Let's step back from the pharmacy counter for a second and look at how a drug actually makes it to the shelf in the first place, and the incredible modern guardrails that track it along the way. Before a manufacturer can even think about submitting a new drug application to the FDA, they have to run an absolute gauntlet of clinical trials. Phase 1 is really small, just 20 to 80 healthy volunteers, and the goal is purely to figure out if the drug is safe and what the side effects are. Phase 2 steps it up to test efficacy in a few hundred patients who actually have the disease. Finally, Phase 3 scales this up massively to thousands of people to gather large-scale safety and effectiveness data. Only after navigating these extremely strict phases can a drug get approved.
But, for some exceptionally high-risk drugs, standard approval just isn't enough. The FDA can mandate a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, or REMS for short. This is when the FDA finds it absolutely necessary to tightly control how a drug is prescribed and dispensed to ensure that the benefits truly outweigh a known serious risk. It's an extra layer of serious protection.
Let's look at one of the most famous REMS programs out there, the iPledge program for the acne medication isotretinoin, which can cause severe birth defects. This brilliantly illustrates how a REMS program creates an intense, overlapping web of responsibility. The prescriber, the patient, and the pharmacy must all be officially registered in the system. The prescriber has to enter negative pregnancy tests. The patient must legally commit to using contraception. The pharmacy has to obtain a specific risk management authorization before dispensing. And on top of all that, you can only get a maximum 30-day supply and absolutely no refills are allowed. I mean, it is an incredibly tight safety net.
Tragically, though, even with all these rules, safety requires constant updating. And again, laws are so often reactive. In the fall of 2012, a compounding center produced a contaminated injectable steroid. It caused a massive fungal meningitis outbreak across more than 20 states, resulting in the tragic deaths of over 60 patients and hundreds of infections. This total disaster forced Congress to pass the Drug Quality and Security Act. A massive part of that legislation was the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or DSCSA, which created a uniform national electronic track and trace system. Basically, it means that today, as a drug moves from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to your local pharmacy, electronic transaction data absolutely must be passed along with it. Pharmacies have to verify this data, investigate suspect products, and maintain these electronic records for a full 6 years. It is a highly sophisticated system built entirely to prevent counterfeit, stolen, or illegitimate products from ever reaching your hand.
All right, Section 4, the Poison Prevention Packaging Act, looking at physical protections.
Okay, so a safe, fully tracked drug finally reaches the pharmacy. Now we have to ensure the physical package it goes into keeps vulnerable people, especially children, safe in your home. Enter the Poison Prevention Packaging Act, or PPPA. While the PPPA strictly mandates child-resistant caps for nearly all prescriptions and many over-the-counter drugs, there are highly specific exceptions. A major study tip from our source is memorizing these exemptions because they exist for very practical, life-saving reasons. For example, sublingual nitroglycerin is used for acute chest pain. Obviously, if someone is having a heart attack, they literally cannot be struggling with a child-proof cap. Other common-sense exemptions include aerosol inhalers for asthma or oral contraceptives that come in those specific memory dispenser packs.
And remember how we talked about the overlap of federal laws earlier? Well, here is a fantastic example of that. If a pharmacist improperly packages a drug in a regular cap without a specific request from the patient or doctor, it's a violation of the Poison Prevention Packaging Act, sure. But because a drug is now improperly packaged according to federal rules, it actually makes the drug legally misbranded under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, too. That's one single action resulting in 2 massive federal violations.
And finally, Section 5, patient privacy, focusing on HIPAA and high-tech.
Let's move to our ultimate guardrail. The federal government protects your physical health with drug laws, but it also heavily protects your digital and informational privacy through HIPAA and the High-Tech Act. Under HIPAA, pharmacies are considered covered entities. As a general golden rule, they can only share your protected health information, or PHI, with your explicit written authorization. But of course, there are practical, necessary exceptions. A pharmacy doesn't need your written consent to use your info for providing treatment, billing your insurance for payment, or just normal healthcare operations. They can also share it for crucial public health activities, like reporting adverse drug events to the FDA, or if it's legally required by a law enforcement request.
Now, let's see how this builds with the High-Tech Act. The High-Tech Act strengthened HIPAA by adding incredibly strict breach notification requirements. If a pharmacy's data gets hacked, or even if paper records are improperly disposed of, they have 60 days to notify the affected individuals. But there is a very interesting threshold here, the number 500. If a breach affects 500 or more individuals, it triggers a massive escalation. The pharmacy must notify not just the patients, but the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and they actually have to alert prominent local media within those exact same 60 days. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this question. How do these invisible, overlapping webs of federal law keep you safe every single time you pick up a prescription? From the legacy of the 1938 FDCA, ensuring the chemical safety of the pill, to the electronic track and trace barcodes of the DSCSA, to the physical child-resistant caps of the PPPA, and finally, the strict data privacy protocols of HIPAA, literally every single step is a guardrail. So the next time you hold that little orange bottle, ask yourself, what other unseen layers of protection are silently working in the background of our daily lives? Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.